It all started on a Wednesday afternoon. I remember the way the sunlight danced across the kitchen counter as I scrolled through my emails, sipping on lukewarm coffee. My phone buzzed with a notification, a text message from my husband, Eric. It was short, oddly formal. "We need to talk when you're home tonight. Please don't be late." There was no smiley face or even a hint of his usual warmth. My chest tightened, the ominous tone prickling at my nerves. I tried calling him, but he didn't answer. That alone was strange. Eric never ignored my calls. When I arrived home that evening, the house was eerily quiet. Eric's usual routine, music playing softly from the living room, his laughter while making dinner, was absent. I found him sitting at the dining table, papers neatly stacked in front of him. His expression was calm but distant, like a stranger wearing his face. "Have a seat," he said, motioning to the chair across from him. I hesitated, feeling a wave of unease roll through me. Still I obeyed. "I've been thinking about this for a while," he began, his voice steady, "and I've decided that it's time for us to go our separate ways." The words hit me like a freight train. My stomach lurched, and I felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. "What are you talking about?" I managed to say, my voice trembling. He slid the papers toward me. "Divorce papers. Signed. Filed. My name already scribbled in places where my consent had never been given." My vision blurred as I scanned the documents, the magnitude of his betrayal sinking in. "I emptied our accounts this morning," he added, his tone flat. "I've taken what's mine. You'll be fine with the rest." That's when I realized this wasn't just a conversation, it was an ambush. Eric had planned this meticulously, down to the last penny. And in that moment, as rage and despair collided within me, I knew two things. One, the man I had trusted for over a decade was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. And two, I wasn't going to let him get away with this. After Eric dropped his bombshell, I couldn't move. My hands trembled as I held the divorce papers, my mind racing. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream, to throw the papers in his face and demand an explanation. But I didn't. I sat there, silent, frozen in the moment. "How could you?" I whispered finally, my voice cracking. "You didn't even talk to me about this. We could have worked through whatever this is." Eric leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "We've been drifting apart for years, Claire. You must have felt it too. I didn't want to drag this out any longer. I'm just trying to make things clean for both of us." Clean. The word felt like acid. Nothing about this was clean. It was messy, underhanded, and calculated. "And the money?" I asked, my voice sharper now. "You emptied everything we built together. How is that fair?" Eric didn't flinch. He almost looked bored. "You'll be fine, Claire. You've always been resourceful." That line shattered something inside me. I had sacrificed years of my life for us, working extra hours to support him when his business was struggling, planning our future while he chased his ambitions. And now he wanted to walk away as if those years meant nothing. "Why now?" I demanded, standing up. "What's really going on, Eric? Did you meet someone else?" His jaw tightened. A small, telling gesture. He didn't deny it. That was all I needed to see. "Unbelievable," I muttered, my voice dripping with venom. "You've been planning this, haven't you? How long?" "Long enough to know this is the right decision," he said. Then, as if to twist the knife, he added, "I've already moved out. I'll be staying somewhere else from now on." The weight of his words made me feel like the walls were closing in. He'd orchestrated every detail, removing himself from our life, cutting me off financially, and blindsiding me with legal papers. But what Eric didn't realize was that I wasn't going to crumble. I wasn't the same naive woman who'd let him dictate the terms of my life. As he stood to leave, I stayed rooted in place, watching him walk toward the door. "You think you've won," I said, my voice cold. "But you have no idea what I'm capable of." He paused for a moment, glanced back at me with a flicker of curiosity, then walked out the door. The sound of it closing behind him was like a trigger, igniting something fierce and unrelenting inside me. I wasn't going to let him destroy everything I had worked for. If Eric thought he could erase me from his life so easily, he was in for a surprise. The first night alone in the house felt unbearable. I barely slept, replaying every word of Eric's betrayal in my head. The silence was oppressive, the emptiness of our shared space taunting me. His absence should have felt like a relief after what he'd done, but it didn't. It felt like a vacuum, pulling at everything I thought I knew about my life. But as the hours ticked by, my sadness started to morph into something sharper. Anger. Determination. I wasn't going to sit idly by while Eric skipped off with everything we had built together. The first thing I did was pull out the folder where we kept our important documents. It took some digging, but I found what I was looking for: bank statements, joint account numbers, and the records from Eric's business ventures. My hands shook as I read through them, piecing together just how calculated his actions had been. He hadn't just emptied our accounts. He had siphoned money out over months, quietly draining funds into a separate account in his name. I even found an old email from a financial advisor I didn't recognize, confirming the transfer of assets. So this was his game. Months of deception, quietly ensuring I'd be left with scraps while he walked away with a golden parachute. Two can play at this game, I thought. The next day, I took the morning off work and visited the bank. I needed answers and leverage. I spoke with a sympathetic banker who confirmed my worst suspicions. Eric had removed me as a co-signer from some accounts months ago. But there was a glimmer of hope. One of the accounts still required dual authorization for withdrawals, and Eric hadn't closed it yet. "You can freeze the account temporarily," the banker offered. "That'll prevent any further activity until you and your husband resolve things legally." I didn't hesitate. "Do it." The banker typed away on her keyboard, her expression firm. "It's done. He won't be able to touch a cent until the freeze is lifted." It wasn't much, but it was a start. And it felt good, empowering even. But I wasn't done. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat at the kitchen table, and started making a list. I thought about every asset Eric had forgotten about, every loose thread he might have overlooked in his arrogant rush to cut me out of his life. The car loan was still in both our names. Our second property, a rental condo downtown, was also jointly owned. And then there was his business. I remembered all the times I'd helped him file paperwork, how I'd signed my name alongside his on countless legal forms to get his company off the ground. He may have thought he'd covered his tracks, but I knew Eric better than anyone. And if he was going to come at me with ruthlessness, I was prepared to meet him on his level. My next call was to a lawyer. A good one. "I want to fight this," I told her, my voice steady. "And I want to hit him where it hurts." The lawyer didn't even flinch. "Let's start with what you know," she said, her tone crisp and professional. As I laid out everything, our finances, the accounts, his shady transfers, and even my suspicions about another woman, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in weeks: control. "You have a case," the lawyer assured me. "He may think he's won, but he underestimated you." For the first time since Eric's betrayal, I went to bed with a clear sense of purpose. This wasn't just about money. This was about reclaiming the life I had built. Eric had no idea what was coming. The days following my meeting with the lawyer were a whirlwind. Between freezing accounts and gathering evidence, I felt like a woman on a mission. But as I delved deeper into Eric's life, I realized I couldn't do this alone. I needed help. Someone who could give me insight into Eric's next moves. I thought about calling one of his friends, but Eric wasn't the kind of man who let others get too close. His circle was full of casual acquaintances, people he could charm and impress but never truly confide in. Except for one person, his business partner, Andrew. Andrew and Eric had started their company together years ago. While Eric handled the flashy, client-facing side of things, Andrew was the numbers guy. The one who kept the wheels turning behind the scenes. He was quiet, thoughtful, and most importantly loyal to a fault. Or so I thought. I hesitated for a long time before reaching out. What if Andrew sided with Eric? What if he warned him that I was digging into the business? But something told me to take the risk. I needed to know what Eric was hiding, and Andrew might hold the key. I texted him first, keeping it casual. "Hey Andrew, I could really use someone to talk to. Do you have time for coffee?" His reply came quickly. "Of course. Tomorrow afternoon." We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place where no one would recognize us. Andrew looked nervous as he sat across from me, his hands fidgeting with his coffee cup. "I was surprised to hear from you," he said, his voice low. "Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath, deciding to cut straight to the point. Eric filed for divorce. He emptied our accounts, and I think he's been planning this for months. Andrew's face fell. He looked genuinely shocked, which was a small relief. I had no idea, he said. He never mentioned anything about this to me. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice. Andrew, I need to know if Eric's been moving money through the business. Have there been any unusual transactions? Anything that seems off? He hesitated, glancing around the cafe as if he were afraid someone might overhear. Then he sighed. There have been some things that didn't add up, he admitted. A couple of large transfers that Eric said were for investments, but he didn't provide details. When I asked him about it, he brushed me off. What kind of transfers? I pressed. Andrew pulled out his phone, scrolling through his emails. He set up a separate account under the business's name about 6 months ago. The money's been going there, but I don't know what he's doing with it. He hasn't shared any of the paperwork with me. My stomach churned. This was worse than I thought. Eric hadn't just stolen from our personal accounts. He was potentially siphoning funds from the business, too. Andrew, I said carefully, if Eric's hiding money, it could affect you as much as it affects me. You're his partner. If this blows up, you'll be caught in the fallout. He nodded slowly, realization dawning on his face. You're right. I need to protect myself. Then help me, I said, my voice firm. Show me the transactions. Let me take this to my lawyer. Andrew hesitated for a long moment before finally nodding. Okay, he said. I'll send you everything I have. But Claire, be careful. Eric's not the kind of man who takes losing lightly. I know, I said, my jaw set. But neither am I. By the time I left the cafe, my phone buzzed with an email from Andrew, filled with spreadsheets and transaction records. As I scrolled through them, my suspicion turned into certainty. Eric had been funneling money into offshore accounts under the guise of business expenses. He thought he could outsmart me. He thought I wouldn't fight back. He was wrong. Armed with the documents Andrew provided, I wasted no time forwarding them to my lawyer. Her reply came within the hour. This is exactly what we need. We can leverage this in court, and it'll make him think twice before trying to bully you into a quick settlement. Leverage. That was the key word. Eric wasn't just arrogant, he was calculating. He'd never expect me to have the upper hand, which made it all the more satisfying to think about flipping the script on him. Still, I knew this wasn't going to be enough. If I wanted Eric to truly pay for what he'd done, I needed to be strategic. I couldn't just react to his moves, I had to anticipate them. So I decided to set a trap. First, I reached out to the financial advisor who had facilitated some of Eric's shady transfers. It took a few phone calls and some creative storytelling, but eventually, I convinced her to meet with me. When I walked into her office, I noticed her guarded expression immediately. She knew who I was, and probably that Eric wouldn't want her talking to me. But I came prepared. Listen, I said, sliding the transaction documents across her desk. I know Eric's been working with you to move money. What you probably don't realize is that he's been lying to you about the nature of those funds. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't say anything. Pressed on. Do you really want to be complicit in this? Because once this goes to court, I can guarantee your name will come up. But if you're willing to cooperate, I'll make sure the court knows you were forthcoming. The threat and the promise hung in the air between us. Finally, she sighed. All right, she said, her voice tight. What do you need? Bingo. She handed over more records, ones Eric clearly thought would never see the light of day. They detailed transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands, payments labeled as consulting fees that never went to actual consultants, and even personal expenses disguised as business costs. As I left her office, I felt a spark of triumph. Piece by piece, I was dismantling the empire Eric thought he could protect. But the most important part of the trap was still to come. The next step was public. Eric had always been a man who thrived on his reputation. The successful entrepreneur, the charismatic leader. He cared about how people saw him more than anything else. So I decided to hit him where it hurt most, his image. I quietly arranged a meeting with a journalist I knew from my college days. Sarah was a freelance writer now, and she specialized in uncovering corruption in business. When I told her what I had uncovered about Eric's financial dealings, her eyes lit up with curiosity. This could be big, she said. flipping through the documents I'd handed her. "But are you sure you want this out there? It could get messy." I nodded without hesitation. He made it messy. I'm just exposing the truth. Sarah promised to tread carefully, but I knew that once the story broke, Eric's pristine reputation would be in shambles. As I waited for the article to be published, I kept up appearances. I didn't let Eric know I was onto him. I even responded politely to the cold, formal emails he sent about signing the divorce papers, pretending to deliberate when in reality I was biding my time. Then one Thursday morning it happened. Sarah's article dropped. The headline was brutal. "The Business Mogul's Double Life. How Eric Dawson Used His Company to Hide a Financial Trail of Deception." The details were damning. The public reaction was swift. And I knew it was only a matter of time before Eric came crawling back, desperate to regain control of the situation. The fallout from the article was immediate. By lunchtime, Eric's name was trending online, and not for the reasons he'd like. News outlets picked up Sarah's story, amplifying its reach. His company's clients began pulling out of deals, and whispers of a potential investigation into his finances started circulating. I didn't expect him to contact me right away. Eric wasn't the type to admit defeat easily. But 2 days later, my phone buzzed with his name on the screen. I let it ring. Twice. On the third attempt, I answered. "Claire," he began, his voice tense but trying to sound calm. "We need to talk." "Oh, now you want to talk?" I said, my tone dripping with mock surprise. "What happened to handling everything on your own?" He ignored my jab. "You think you're being clever, but you've blown this out of proportion. Do you realize what you've done? You've put both of us in the crosshairs." "Both of us," I repeated, laughing bitterly. "Don't drag me into your mess, Eric. I didn't drain our accounts or hide money in offshore accounts. That was all you." There was a long silence on his end. I could picture him gripping his phone, trying to calculate his next move. "We can fix this," he said finally, his voice softer, almost pleading. "If we work together, we can clean this up before it gets worse." "Fix this?" I asked, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You mean cover up what you've done so you can come out of this unscathed?" "No, Eric. I'm done cleaning up your messes." "Claire," he said, his voice rising slightly, "this isn't just about me. The business, our assets, they're all tied up in this. If you don't help me, you're going to lose too." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Eric, the only thing I've lost is time I wasted trusting you. But now, I'm reclaiming what's mine. Good luck with your crosshairs. You'll need it." I hung up before he could respond, my heart pounding. For the first time, I heard something in Eric's voice that I never thought I'd hear: fear. The next week was chaos for Eric. I heard from mutual acquaintances that his business was on the brink of collapse, his remaining assets frozen as legal inquiries into his finances began. The lawyer handling my case assured me that his actions only strengthened my position in the divorce. "He's cornered," she told me during a late-night phone call. "At this point, he'll try to negotiate to save face. That's when you'll strike." Sure enough, Eric sent another email a few days later. This one was drastically different in tone. "Claire, I want to settle this amicably. Let's meet and discuss terms." It was tempting to revel in his desperation, but I wasn't ready to give him an easy way out. Instead, I sent a curt reply. "All communication can go through my lawyer. I have nothing to say to you." If Eric wanted out, he was going to play by my rules now. Eric didn't take my silence well. Over the next few days, I received a flurry of emails and text messages. Some apologetic, others angry. Each one reeked of desperation. It was clear he was unraveling. But I stayed quiet. My lawyer assured me that this was exactly where we wanted him. "He's trying to gain the upper hand, but the more frantic he gets, the weaker his position becomes," she said. Instead of responding to Eric, I focused on strengthening my case. Andrew continued to provide me with critical details about Eric's business dealings, and the financial advisor, sensing the tides turning, sent over even more incriminating evidence. Every piece was another nail in the coffin Eric had built for himself. Then it happened. I was sitting in my lawyer's office when she received an email from Eric's legal team. The subject line was simple: settlement proposal. I leaned forward, my heart pounding as she opened it. Eric was offering to split our remaining marital assets down the middle. He would forfeit any claim to the rental condo and agree to pay me a lump sum to avoid a prolonged legal battle. "It's a decent offer," my lawyer said, scanning the document, "but we can do better." I smirked. "Let's counter." Her fingers flew across the keyboard as we drafted our terms. The condo would be mine outright. I would receive a significant portion of the business's assets, enough to ensure I wasn't left in financial ruin. And Eric would cover all legal fees. When she sent the email, I felt a wave of exhilaration. Eric had underestimated me every step of the way, but now he was at my mercy. A week later, I found myself sitting across from Eric in a conference room. It was the first time we'd seen each other since that night at the dining table. He looked tired, defeated even. The man who had once been so smug and confident now barely met my eyes. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" he said bitterly as we reviewed the agreement. "No," I replied calmly. "This is what you forced me to do." He didn't respond, but I saw the flicker of shame in his expression. As he signed the papers, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. This wasn't just about the money or the assets, it was about reclaiming my power. When the meeting ended, Eric tried to catch me on my way out. "Claire," he said softly, "I know you probably won't believe me, but I'm sorry. For everything." I paused, studying him. There was sincerity in his voice, but it wasn't enough to erase the damage he'd done. "I hope you mean that," I said, my tone steady, "because you'll have a lot to reflect on once this is all over." And with that, I walked away, leaving Eric behind for good. The weeks after the settlement felt surreal, as though I were finally stepping out of a storm I'd been trapped in for months. With the legal battle behind me, the condo in my name, and enough financial stability to start fresh, I began to piece my life back together. The first thing I did was purge the house of anything that reminded me of Eric. Old photos, clothes he'd left behind, gifts he'd given me. They all went into a box that I dropped off at a donation center. It wasn't just about decluttering. It was about reclaiming my space. Next, I focused on myself. For so long, my identity had been tied to Eric. His needs, his ambitions, his betrayals. Now, I was determined to figure out who I was without him. I started going to yoga classes, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the time for. I reconnected with old friends who welcomed me back with open arms. Their warmth a reminder that I was more than the woman Eric had tried to leave behind. One evening, while sorting through a stack of old mail, I found a flyer for a local charity event. It was a fundraiser for women starting over after divorce, a cause that suddenly felt deeply personal. On a whim, I decided to attend. The event was small but lively, filled with women who had stories like mine. As I listened to their experiences, I felt a sense of camaraderie, a shared resilience that inspired me. By the end of the night, I'd signed up to volunteer with the organization, helping other women navigate the challenges of rebuilding their lives. It wasn't just healing for them, it was healing for me too. As the months passed, I began to notice a shift in how I thought about Eric. The anger that had fueled me through the divorce started to fade, replaced by something softer. Not forgiveness, at least not yet, but acceptance. He had shown me who he truly was, and as painful as it had been, it had also freed me. The very next week, I enrolled in a writing workshop and started sketching out plans for my future. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living for myself. A year after the divorce, I stood at the edge of a quiet beach, the sun dipping below the horizon in hues of gold and lavender. The salty breeze kissed my face, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the air. This wasn't just any beach, it was a place I'd dreamed of visiting for years, a destination I never thought I'd see. It felt symbolic, standing there alone, reflecting on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the fight, the rebuilding. It had all led me here, to a place where I could finally breathe without the weight of the past pressing on my chest. In the months following the settlement, I had thrown myself into creating a life I could be proud of. The charity work I started became a cornerstone of my new identity. I met incredible women, women who had faced their own storms and come out stronger. We shared stories, laughter, and tears, forming a bond that felt like a lifeline on the hardest days. I also found a job that excited me again, a consulting role that allowed me to use the skills I'd spent years honing. It felt good to rediscover my passion for work, to be respected for my expertise instead of treated like an afterthought. But perhaps the most important change was the way I began to rediscover myself. I embraced the quiet moments, the time spent alone, and the freedom to make decisions without compromise. I learned to enjoy my own company, something I hadn't done in years. Eric was still a shadow in my life, but only faintly. I heard through mutual acquaintances that his business had never recovered from the fallout, and he'd moved to another city to start over. Part of me wondered if he ever regretted what he'd done, but I quickly realized it didn't matter. His choices were his own, and they no longer defined me. What defined me was this. Standing on that beach, the sand between my toes, the wind in my hair, and the realization that I had survived. I had endured the betrayal, the loss, and the pain, and I had come out stronger for it. As the last rays of sunlight faded, I closed my eyes and smiled. The future stretched out before me, unwritten and full of possibilities. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what was ahead. I was ready,